Aloha everyone and welcome to Throwback Thursday. I am DeSoto Brown, the Bishop Museum historian, and I'm speaking to you from Bishop Museum Archives in Honolulu. And today I want to explore a topic which is kind of general, but basically it comes down to things that you don't really think about that you kind of always assumed were always there, but they really never were there from the beginning. They really did have a time when they began. And I'm going to show you and explain to you when some of those things came into our lives that we totally take for granted. And here's the first thing that everybody knows about, even if you've never been here. You've certainly seen Diamond Head. And you know that Diamond Head is located next to the beach at Waikiki. And it is a famous outline of a mountain that people all over the world are familiar with. Even if they don't know where it is, they do know that it's some famous tropical beach. Well, you would think that Diamond Head probably was formed geologically back when the island of Oahu itself was formed geologically, and it's just as old as all the rest of the mountains are. And you'd be wrong, because Diamond Head is much younger than a lot of the island of Oahu is. Oahu is made up of the Waianae mountain range and the Ko'olau mountain range. And after those two different volcanoes erupted and formed the island, there was a period of probably 2 million years where the island of Oahu just weathered and it didn't have any active volcanic activity. And then all of a sudden, after 2 million years, new volcanoes began to erupt. And those volcanoes formed some of the geological features that we know today, like Punch Bowl and Coco Head and Coco Crater and Hanauma Bay, as well as Diamond Head. But they didn't all happen at one time. They happened over a period of hundreds of thousands of years. So it's been pointed out that because of the amount of time that passed probably between those eruptions, maybe another one of those volcanoes could erupt near the island of Oahu. Probably wouldn't be on Oahu, because probably at this point it would be offshore if it happened in the deep ocean. But nonetheless, that means that Diamond Head is much, much younger than the rest of the island of Oahu, and therefore it has weathered a great deal. And as the island weathers over time to come, someday Diamond Head will be all washed away, even if there is the rest of Oahu still standing. Okay, so Diamond Head has not always been here. Now, something else that we all take for granted and we use all the time is being able to write and being able to read. And so you think, well, everybody's always been able to read and write because that's such an important part of human culture. And again, you would be wrong. The ancient Hawaiians did not read or write. They didn't have a written language. Now think about that. That means that in order for Hawaiian people to have communicated hundreds or thousands of years ago, people throughout the Pacific, the only way they could do that is if they were close enough to each other to speak and to be able to hear each other. They couldn't communicate long distances. They couldn't send messages except if somebody verbally told them something somebody else had said. Well, all of that changed when Hawaiians first encountered reading and writing, and that would have been at the time that Captain Cook arrived, which was in 1778. But it took several decades before literacy really began to spread, and it really was pushed when the first missionaries came in the 1820s. And then Hawaiians became very literate. Everybody took to reading and writing. And it meant that for the first time, if you wanted to communicate with somebody, you could write something down, and that piece of paper could be taken, and somebody far away could know what you wanted them to do. So this is 2 pages from a Hawaiian language children's reading book. It was published in 1868. And it's actually an English language textbook for children that was just translated into Hawaiian, and It has the same illustrations, etc., that would have been used for American kids reading American books to learn to read and write English. One thing that is different is, if you look on this side, you can see that these are the only letters that are used in the written Hawaiian language. So it doesn't contain the entire English alphabet or Roman alphabet that we use. It just has these 12 letters that are used for reading and writing Hawaiian language. But this is a really good indication of the huge change that literacy brought to Hawaiian culture. And again, we can't imagine living in a world where we weren't able to read and write and send messages via using the alphabet. And yet, there was a time that it didn't exist. Well, something else that we don't even think about, but it's all over the place, and it's a part of our lives in any urban area, and even not even that many urban areas, and out in the country too, are these poles that you see in the photograph here. These poles are today called utility poles because they carry wires, and wires have various uses. There were no utility poles in the Hawaiian Islands until about the 1880s. Nobody saw them. Nobody knew what they would have been used for. It didn't really make any difference. Actually, I have to go back a little bit. The first technology that used wires that had to be on poles was the telegraph. And the telegraph was invented in the United States in the 1840s. And so this is the first reason that poles were put up to carry wires. There weren't a lot of telegraphs in use in the Hawaiian Islands, and it wasn't until telephones became common in the 1880s that there began to be poles, and that's why some of us who are older still call these telephone poles. And then sometime after telephone wires were put up, then electricity began to be used, which again, of course, required wires to carry electricity from the place where it was generated to the various places that were going to use it. We, again, as I say, don't even think about poles. We see them all the time. Lots of places, of course, telephone poles or utility poles are no longer used because the wires are underground. But lots of older places, there are still poles with wires. We can't even imagine an environment that doesn't have these. And yet, they weren't always here. They, like all these other things I'm talking about, had to come out of somewhere and become common. Well, something else that's maybe sort of like a telephone pole or utility pole in that it is tall and skinny, but not the same thing at all, is a coconut palm. And coconut palms grow all over the place in the Hawaiian Islands at lower elevations. They don't grow very well in the mountains, but they are so common here that a lot of times we don't really pay attention to them. And you might think, well, there always have been coconut palms here, like other trees and plants, and that is not the case. Coconuts are so important for people who live in the tropics, and they were centuries and hundreds of thousands of years ago, that we don't even know where this tree originated because people carried it all around the world over thousands of years because it was so important to them. And if you live on a coral atoll, coconuts are extremely important in providing food, in providing liquid that you can drink, in providing material that you can make your houses out of, and things like that. Well, you might think that because coconuts can float, they might have floated here over the ocean to get to the Hawaiian Islands. And we don't think that's true. We think that the Hawaiians probably brought coconuts with them on long-distance voyaging canoes, and it wasn't until Hawaiians got here that coconut palms began to be seen in the Hawaiian Islands. Well, today we don't really use coconuts very much for all of the purposes that people traditionally did, but we still do plant a lot of them, and they still grow in lots of different places. But today, they're just decorative. They look tropical, they look attractive, and particularly for tourists who come here, we want it to look tropical and like what they want it to see, so plant coconut palms. And finally, something that isn't maybe as culturally important or important as some of the other things I've told you about, but they're all over the place and they affect our lives: parking meters. And you might think, well, okay, when did parking meters? Probably been here forever. No, not literally forever, because of course there weren't any parking meters anywhere until the 1930s, and that's when they were invented in the United States. Parking meters didn't come here until 1951, and this is a photograph of one of the first parking meters that was installed at the airport, the Honolulu airport. And parking meters, you would think, are just a way for the government to earn money from charging people for parking. And you'd be wrong. The real reason for parking meters is because it's to make people move their cars, not park them and leave them permanently in one place for long periods of time. And that's why these were installed at the Honolulu airport, because the people who worked at the airport were parking in the parking lot, and when people who came to use the airport found there weren't any places to park. So by making people move their cars, then people going to the airport to drop people off or pick them up were able to find parking spaces. And in 1952, parking meters spread to downtown Honolulu, and a short time after that they spread to Waikiki, and now they're all over the place. And so, just as I said with those earlier things, some of these things weren't here all the time. Even if you didn't think about it, now you know when some of these things came, when some of these things changed. Things are not eternal. All right. I am speaking to you from Bishop Museum, and I want you to know that you can visit Bishop Museum online at bishopmuseum.org. And you can do that before you come here for a visit in person. But if you can't come here for a visit in person, you can visit us online and see what's going on here. Also, if you are looking at this little Throwback Thursday broadcast on a screen that has a donate button, we would love it if you would click on the donate button and give us some money to support some of the things that we do here. And finally, if you would like to come in person to Bishop Museum Archives, where I work, you can do so during our public hours, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons from 1 to 4 p.m., and Saturday mornings from 9 a.m. to 12 noon, except on long weekends when we are closed. So that wraps up Throwback Thursday for this week, and until next week, when I will see you again, aloha.